I'd like to introduce Dominic Rossini, who's with Deloitte Consulting here from New York, and John Atkin from Deloitte, who's here from Chicago. So they're going to lead our lunchtime discussion. It's going to be interactive. There'll be a chance for Q&A as well. And the topic is context is everything. So I'll let them provide the context. Thank you.
Nice. Hi, everybody. Dominic and I have the pleasure of speaking to you for the next hour or so around context and the importance of context in the AI world. We both have a couple of intros to set ourselves up so you can understand where we're coming from, and we can lay a couple of our ideas out before we start speaking about pulling it together and really digging into why we think context is everything. So I'm John. I work with clients. I'm a consultant, and I work with clients typically in the marketing transformation space, advertising, sales, essentially front office revenue generation for clients. And AI is a huge part of what we are talking to our clients about right now. A couple of the statements that I want to make just to lay out what I believe about the world right now. One, AI is transformation. We've been in this session today, we've spoken a lot about AI as a technology. We've spoken about what it can do, how it can do it. But the real value from AI comes in moving organizations, moving teams, and changing the way that people do things. So AI is transformation. That's critically important as far as I'm concerned to keep in our minds as we go through this. The human factor of moving people to an AI world cannot be overlooked, especially when we're talking about things like ROI and where does it come from and how do you change an organization. AI is transformation. Second thing, AI is hard. I don't think that the majority of people understand what AI is. I think when people think about AI, the first thing we talk about and like place we go to is LLMs. LLMs as AI. But the industry is evolving and is creating a system of intelligence. And that system of intelligence is the most important thing to understand. LLMs, as Dom will say, represent an undergrad. I like to say 22-year-old Johnny, my name's John, my friends call me Johnny, 22-year-old Johnny, smart and dumb at the same time. Right? Read everything, I could talk about anything, but you put me into the workforce and I run up against a brick wall because I have no expertise. I have no depth in what I've done. We're going to talk about the answer to that, and the answer to that is context. Providing context to an LLM is the same as having me work for 25 years, lose all my hair, and stand on the stage right now, right? So context is everything. AI is transformation. AI is hard. Most people don't understand what AI is. And therefore, one of the things that we need to be thinking about is helping people to understand where the value sits in the ecosystem. Jake just mentioned the stat from MIT, around 95% of AI use cases having less ROI than people were looking for. I mean, I think that's probably absolutely the case. But if you assume that 95% of these solutions don't have the ROI that people are looking for, and 95% of people really don't understand what the mechanics and the components of the systems of AI are, it's no surprise that we are in a stage right now where we are learning collectively what it is to drive value, what it is to create these systems, what it is to think about the injection of information and data. We've spoken a lot about data. We'll speak more about data shortly. All of these things become incredibly important in understanding how AI solutions should be built, how you bring organizations along on their AI journeys, how we advise clients, or how I advise clients on where to put their money, where to put their bets, how to think about short-term versus medium-term versus long-term investments around AI and what kind of assets you're creating and so forth. So my position, context is everything. AI, transformation, and AI is hard. Dom.
Thanks, John. I'm Dominic Rosini. I'm a partner out of the New York office, and I am in the AI and data practice, so it's in the name what I do. I am the leader responsible for driving AI and data in the THS sector, that is transportation, hospitality, and services sector, for those in the room if you're interested. And I also work with these two young ladies at the front of the room. I also drive our marketing and eminence. So these types of events where we talk to a collection of individuals representing industry who are adopters of both data and AI transformative technologies is part and parcel of what I need to do in my role for marketing and eminence. So it's a great pleasure to be talking with you today. And I bet everyone was surprised that the two gentlemen standing on the stage right now, neither of them have an American accent. I want to reinforce a couple of things that John mentioned. The first one is context is everything. But to me, I translate that a little differently. I absolutely share that message with my clients. But the question that I ask them is, who's taking care of your data? Where is your data? Now, quite typically, if I speak to a COO or a CFO, oh, my ERP, this is my closing consolidation system, here's my FP&A, this is where we do our AOP. Hey, that's great. These tables are fantastic. But where's the PDF that was created for the investor relations report in Q4 2022 where you were fighting activist investment? Because at some point in time, that's going to become valuable for these agentic and generative approaches that are going to be part of transforming the way that you do business. That data is not available in its regular form. That needs to be made available to really harness the transformative power of generative AI and agentic AI. So context is everything. The context required are these data assets that are out in the ether somewhere, floating around, waiting to be used and incorporated into something that uses sophisticated logic, probabilistic models to tell you an answer to a question that you've asked. Is it a great answer? I don't know. As one of my data scientist friends says, all models are wrong, some are useful. But that's the reality, right? We're looking for likelihood, probabilities, what makes kind of sense, and to be able to feed those models with the right type of data gives us the context that we need to be able to realize the transformative power of AI. The second thing I'll reinforce is we really are at a stage where we need to rethink what AI is doing to our organizations. This is a little controversial, but you're going to hear it here first. A couple of people already know this. They've heard me say this. It was in the report that Diana mentioned previously, this disproportionate spending on AI seen as a technological investment. We keep talking about AI as digital labor, digital workforce, yet we treat it as a technology. To me, that feels a little bit incongruent. And I think that there is a maturation required to be able to get to a point where we can consider really what does it mean to adopt and implement AI agents within the fabric of our organization beyond thinking about it as technology. So you might hear some of that pop up as well, but I think that reinforces some of what John said. So with introductions out of the way, I think we jump into the meat of what we got to talk about, right? Okay. There we go. John, you want to take us away?
Yeah, we're going to talk. So we have an iceberg slide, and the punchline is that the value in the AI world is below the waterline. Right now, a lot of the discussion, like I said earlier, around AI is around the quality of LLMs, and there's no doubt that the DeepSeek release in February of this year accelerated speed to market for some of the earlier stage LLM models that were being developed. And those have got better and better and better. They've gone from being generative in nature, so being able to write a poem in the voice of William Shakespeare, to being able to be reasoning models. And they're able to reason and think logically from start to finish with a goal in mind. But 22-year-old Johnny can do that. but without the expertise and the ability to be able to work, the ability to have that information as part of my reasoning skills, I'm not able to be useful and productive in a working environment. So one of the things that we need to be thinking about doing is understanding where, when, and how we focus our time and our attention on what is below the waterline. I'm going to take a step back and do a little bit of audience participation. Who in the room has built something using artificial intelligence?
Should be everybody, I would hope.
Right. And so what my recommendation would be to build something. Those types of, that process of going through and creating a solution and understanding the relationship between how you give it information and the quality of the outputs that it provides is fascinating. Okay, a couple of other things. Who here has used Google before? 75% of people have used Google. Excellent. So the reason I ask that is that the other thing to think about as we're talking about AI and we're talking about context is that we're actually in a paradigm shift in the way that things and the way that the people work. Historically, I'm looking around and I imagine everybody, if they wanted to, I'm not going to ask you to, could think about making the sound of dial-up in your head. Remember dial-up? Everybody can make the sound. There's a at some point, right? We are at the dial-up stage of the AI world right now. What we're seeing is a huge amount of investment, a huge amount of interest in that world. One of the things that happened with the dial-up phase is we got Google. And we got Google as a way to be able to interact with information, right? We have a portal and Google organizes information, provides information to us. That's great. How does that work though? Like, what are we doing with that information? We are taking our brains, getting the information, bringing it back into our brain, which already has schemas and knowledge and expertise and everything. We're assimilating it, making a decision, and then going to the next stage and saying, I need this information, I'm going to bring this into my brain. And then I'm going to use that to drive another set of decisions. The paradigm shift with AI is that what we're actually going to be doing is shifting the cognitive processing from our brains to the computer, to the algorithm, to the system of intelligence to support it. Therefore, one of the things we need to think about is what it is and what it means to be a human brain and what human intelligence looks like in order for us to be able to be successful in an AI world. And what that means is thinking about what's a memory? How do you use memory? What's expertise? How do you use expertise? What frameworks do we have? All of these things are contextual information that live in our brains that allow us to process information, process signals, and come out with a response. Every single piece of that is better with more context. Context is everything. The last thing I'll say, just before I hand over to Dom, I'll hand back to Dom. When I said we're in the early stage of AI, right? The dial-up phase of AI. And the future is going to look very different. As we get towards that future, the work that's going to be happening is real work around understanding and training people on the transformation of AI, understanding the importance of the information that we feed to the AI solutions, context engineering over prompt engineering, for example, and then understanding how we can use that to rethink what the future can look like. Because the future isn't going to be the way that we work. The future isn't going to be the way that we interact. I mean, if you're following the news the last couple of days, there are more and more and more and more solutions being produced by the big AI houses. There's more and more investment going into them. There's more and more industry expertise. There's more and more industry models. There's more and more people thinking about evals and all the stuff that's going to make solutions better. I spend my time in the financial services industry. And, you know, the things that we're seeing, the purchase of ROI, agentic commerce protocol, and these types of things are going to change the way that we work. The key for that, and the thing that we are talking to our clients about right now, is recognizing that the world's going to be different, but that the underlying value is in the way that you construct, understand, and feed and model contextual information to be able to support decision making at scale across an organization.
So from a translation perspective, what does this mean for you within your organizations? Like, what does it actually mean to build the appropriate context and think about getting your data estate in order? For anyone interested, anyone Googling, if you want to Google my name and Wall Street Journal and data estate, you'll find an article that was published earlier in the year about getting your data estate in order for generative AI. And it mentions a couple of things. The first is 80% of data nowadays is unstructured. It's JPEGs, it's pictures, videos, audio, all valuable data assets for the purposes of AI transformation, but underutilized or unharnessed. The second thing that it would say is that while our approaches to data management and thinking about governance have evolved somewhat over the course of the last 10 years or so, there's still a long way to go about how we think about data assets for real adoption and use and democratization within the organization, right? How do we actually control security while also enabling usage? I'll tell you something that's like quite interesting. So if we're talking about some of these assets like the PDF that was created, the versions of the PDF that were created for like this investor relations call as an example, it's probably in someone's C drive, floating around in a computer that they walk about everywhere, and we're worried about security for AI. Like, I think we should also be worried about general security of these assets when they're sitting elsewhere, right, in a C drive or a D drive somewhere. So the security question is not a new one. We're simply changing the nature with which we need to address it. It would probably actually be a much more effective managerial effort to pull that data into being utilized for generative AI than just keeping it out in someone's C drive, just kind of wandering around in airports. I would hate to imagine what's on my C drive. The other, oh, we're off.
That's not an us thing.
It's not? Okay, 1 second. The third thing is this forces us to rethink how do we approach data management within our organization. And there were 2 points that are part of that article that I wanted to say to the group today. The first is skill sets require changing. We think about tabular data, the management of databases, DBAs. That's been around for a long time. That's been around since, you know, real technological transformation being driven through the 70s and 80s, mainframes. It's kind of persisted through to now. It's been some modernization changes. We've moved to the cloud, starting to think about elasticity, starting to think about serverless. But fundamentally, those skills are pretty much the same. Tabular data management and governance is still required. But what does it actually mean to manage assets that are ontologically relevant? What does it mean to appropriately metadata tag for categorization and classification so that it can be used contextually, right? I love my own version of the 3 C's. Classification, categorization for context. The reality is that brings technological teams and business teams much closer together, because the reality is the business understanding of how that data should be used within their function is far superior to what the IT department can say is like, we think you should do this. IT department now is in a situation where they need much closer partnerships with the business to understand how quickly and how effectively they need to move to make that data available within the applications that are AI-centric. Final thing I will say, of similar kind, an extension of that thought, is the reality is the end user is changing also. So IT teams used to speaking with product owners, people who can naturally kind of think the language of technology because they have a responsibility to do so, right? Many individuals in the organization are maybe users of, say, an ERP application, but there's really only a handful of individuals who are filtering enhancement requests and an understanding of what real business requirements would be for any sort of module across an ERP. The change now is because we are looking for productivity within a number of individuals within the workforce, technological teams need to be able to understand the language of different end users. And that level of sophistication, that kind of transformation as an organization really is going to be critical to whether or not you get the time to value, that speed, that expedited time to value of the adoption of data for the purposes of context. So that's my riff about data. Anyone found the article yet? No? I'll give you time. You've got another 28 minutes to find it before I get off stage. But here's what I'm going to say from a capabilities perspective, just so you know that this is something that has already been echoed on the panel this morning. If you haven't spoken already about retrieval augmented generation, if you haven't already spoken about vector DBs or vectorization, if you haven't already spoken about knowledge graphs or graph RAGs, which is an evolved kind of way to think about the use of knowledge graphs and retrieval augmented generation, now's the time to do so. Historically, over the course of the last 2 years, I heard many, many individuals talking about above the waterline. What are the use cases? What's the value? What are the models that we're going to get? I don't want to sound too alarmist, but I don't care. What is really fundamental is that you have the infrastructure, the capabilities and the technologies and the data in a way that it doesn't matter what the use case is or the model is. They are all empowered in the same way to bring the value you need for the organization. And I think one of the challenges is, to echo John's point, that's difficult. And unfortunately, it's unsexy work. It's unsexy work. It's very sexy to have an AI conversation about how finance is transformed, how supply chain is transformed, how our sales force is transformed to be able to do their job more effectively with the use of AI. It's a little different when you have to be the propeller head in the corner that basically says, what about all of our unstructured data? But if you can be an evangelist of that in your organization, and if you can think of just a methodical, pragmatic approach to thinking about unstructured data aggregation, consolidation, tagging, and effective governance, I think you'll be the answer to why 95% of AI projects are not necessarily realizing the ROI. Apart from the fact that our own internal surveys, obviously there is the human perspective of what we're saying, but basing it on both of the data, there's still a need to achieve more. And if you can be the agent driving that change, I think there'll be some credit in there for you in the future.
So we approach even saying the word data and data differently.
It's data.
And the types of data that are available or can be made available are vast. You can think about ERP data. We spoke about signal data. We spoke about, Jake just mentioned about physical real world data. In the corporate world, there's another set of data. And that set of data is how we get things done. And that set of data is really hard to pin down. It's not glamorous work. But I've sat in many, many, many digital transformation meetings where we're sitting around conference rooms saying, all right, so what's this one process we're looking to be able to do? How do we go from this person to 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 this person? And it's very easy for people in their roles to say, I do this, and then we hand it to this person, and that person's like, yeah, you give it to me, and then I do this, and you give it to me. Every single piece of information that's flowing through that conversation is context. And every single piece of information that's flowing through the system that is context, in a business sense, is how you do things. It's the spirit of an organization. So part of one of the things that we are doing as we are speaking to clients around context and understanding context is helping clients to understand the importance of being able to reflect on what we do and how we do it and turn that information into a set of standards and protocols and approaches that an agentic system can use at scale. Agentic system is essentially the AI models with a systems thinking hat on. How do you take this person, give them a job, or this model, give it a job, give to this model to give it a job, to give to this model to give it a job. And the question throughout is always, what does good look like? What are the decisions that need to get made? And how do we make those decisions? And part of what we're thinking about right now is the future. We're talking about next gen agent. we're talking about the future, and the future of these models. One of the questions is, well, aren't we all going to be the same? Isn't everything going to be this? Aren't we all going to have the same solutions and therefore have no differentiation in the marketplace? I think that kind of belies a lack of deep understanding of the value of the system of artificial intelligence as opposed to the LLMs. The LLMs themselves, yeah, I'm sure they'll get much, they are beginning to commoditize, getting towards the same place. But what that means in terms of these the clients that we work with, when we're talking about what the future of value can look like, it's about making sure that the brand that you have, the way that you work, the way that you think, what differentiates you, the way that you make decisions is reflected in your contextual data, so that when the agents go to work, they can go to work like a 22-year-old grad who's been given 25 years worth of expertise in a vector database, which is injectable via a RAG solution, and gives that agent immediate access to the expertise, ways of working that our organization does. And to me, that is a really hard conversation to have, because it's not just like go and get your CRM data or go and get your ERP data or go and get your financial data. It's go and work with humans, understand how things happen, what the overall processes are, and then rethink that entire thing, reskill those people, and then start again. That is really hard, but it goes nowhere without context. So therefore, context is everything.
I will simply add to that, and for the economists in the room, I'll use some language here that maybe would resonate. I'll tie this back to this digital labor statement that I made at the start versus human labor at the start. What's the main issue with human labor within an organization? It's not fatigue. Like, there's obviously, real humanitarian kind of questions, but main issue is coordination costs, right? Like, we all think about that, as the organization expands, as we have coordination costs. And what John's referencing here is this need to think about agentic architectures and agentic frameworks as a series of handovers in which there are intrinsic coordination costs that need to be effectively managed. What helps us smooth over or expedite the ability to transition from one agent to another? And it's managing those coordination costs by context. And that's what those technologies do. That's what you're potentially going to advocate for when you go back to your organizations and say, I know why we didn't quite get what we wanted out of the agent that we're using for supporting Salesforce optimization. It's because we don't have enough context behind the model. So we need to think about the data that's being fed into it, how the data is being fed into it, the capabilities that we have to feed data into it. I think that would be a very, very interesting conversation, because what we're trying to achieve is giving the model the ability to say is like, yeah, but let me give you the nuance. That's what we want the model to do. Basically turning 22-year-old Johnny or Dom into the... I was a terrible undergraduate student, by the way, so I absolutely would not have 22-year-old Dom doing anything. But turning 22-year-old Dom into triple PhD Dom and saying, you know what, I have this repository of data that I can call upon at any time to be able to make effective, sophisticated recommendations about how we should move forward and to provide the answer that you need. That's really what we're trying to achieve here. Just out of interest, I'd be interested if anyone in the room who's kind of seen the model didn't quite give me what I wanted, and I think it's because it's just drawing from this pool of general knowledge that's available to everybody, isn't it? So I see a lot of nods in the room. It's like, yeah, I was disappointed. I was disappointed about this. I have several clients right now who are struggling with the same question. And I'm really disappointed with our investment. We're not quite getting what we want. It's because you haven't done anything with it. You pulled it off the shelf and you said, yeah, go. You walked into the first car lot that you came across on, the car road and said, I'll take that vehicle, and you actually want to go four-wheel drive. It doesn't work that way, right? You're going to need to make selections and beef up the car, modify the car a little bit so it's fit for purpose. And that's exactly the same situation that we're doing here, but under the umbrella of context, right?
We have 18 minutes, and I could tell you more stories about how context is everything, because I think it is. But what we'd love to be able to do is just take a second and take any questions from the audience. Anybody? Dom asked a starting question. I guess another way to ask the question is the inverse. Is there anybody who, when we say on stage context is everything, is getting super excited and kicking their colleague underneath the table? Is anybody else already on the same page in terms of context? Has anybody done anything with context? Yes.
Just in order to tee up the question, because we're about to get it, I'm going to give you an example that is shareable, but it's a very funny one. It's an internal one. As people have referenced on the stage who are members of my firm, we have a number of generative AI and agentic assets that we use internally. One of them is called Sidekick. AI Assist, Ascend, that's a platform. But one is called Sidekick. Sidekick reads from a 6,000 data asset curated data set via RAG. One of the drivers behind creating that curated data set and one of the measures of whether or not it was successful is if Sidekick could answer the question, who is the Deloitte CEO? Because before that data set, it could not answer it effectively. Because we have like 20. There's one for every member firm in the world. There's a global CEO. There's 4 CEOs in the US. One at the Deloitte Green Dot level and 3 at the subgroup level. Something as simple as that, where we're eating our own dog food. We're trying to transform with AI as well. And we needed to invest in providing context and really anchoring a transformative, productivity-centric asset like Sidekick for our organization. We had to tell it how to navigate the question, who is our CEO? Now, that's a simple example. So imagine as your complexity evolves and as the more sophisticated questions get thrown to your agents, it's absolutely going to need a lot more data to be able to be effective. I hope you enjoyed that. I loved hearing that example. But it's a funny one.
Any questions from the audience? Or are we all, there we go. Hey.
I really love hearing about.
I don't know if that's off.
Hello. Oh, it's back. So I really loved hearing about I think if you were on the panel, that bottom hidden part is what we addressed.
You were talking about it.
Yes. The question though I have is, context is something that's easy to understand. But when you go to implement it, in my mind, the best way to implement it is have an efficient, scalable graph database that lets you define, basically represent your taxonomies and ontologies on top, which essentially represents the relationships that you're talking about. But there is this fundamental fear of using anything other than relational, databases. Is that something that you guys have encountered too? Is it changing? Are knowledge graphs more, are people more open to the idea of knowledge graphs for helping them get to, solving these problems?
The fear comes from a lack of understanding about how it's utilized and adopted and why it's different to traditional relational database approaches. I was in a conversation yesterday afternoon. This is why I was slightly late to the dinner. Deloitte has an internal group called SFL Scientific, tremendous amount of expertise there. And we were talking about knowledge graphs specifically. I had to make a statement to one of them and I said, listen, I love that we're talking about a knowledge graph and that we're ultimately going to go here, but I'm going to tell you, no SVP of FP&A has ever told me they don't need BI in a daily sales report. So I still need the tabular data to be able to do this. What we're actually going to talk about is how we take that curated data set and add that to the knowledge graph.
Right.
So this is an incremental technology, not a replacement one. That's the first thing.
Right.
The second point is it then changes the nature of the use case we're talking about, where daily sales reports require, and I know I'm using daily sales reports as an example, daily sales reports required by field force, FP&A analysts all the time. That's not the question you're asking the knowledge graph. What was my sales for this product in this region over this time? You're asking them a slightly more sophisticated questions. And the way that conversation went was, what is a likely M&A target for us? where their products align with our product mix? That's a great question. So in the context of what you're asking, there is a need to educate and reframe, understand that this is incremental technology, from my perspective anyway, and also why are different capabilities relevant for enabling different use cases, which is a reference architecture conversation. And we need to be comfortable to have those conversations.
Thank you.
The only add I'll give to that is, and I'm sure you are on the same page, in the world, corporations take a while to turn around. The pace at which new capabilities, protocols, components are being built in the AI industry, I think is much faster than corporations can keep up with. So I think the answer is also some yes, some no, even within the same organization. One of the things that we are super keen on, though, is making sure that when we are talking to clients and when we are speaking about some of these evolutions, that we are helping people to understand, like, this might be new or this might be different, but is this something that's going to stay? And if it's going to stay, should we invest in it and build out our knowledge graphs and build out our understanding of why these things are important? Because I'm sure, like, I had a call with a client yesterday where we were preparing for a meeting with the CEO. And one of the things we're talking about is how quickly things are evolving and why it's important to be aware of what's evolving and what's happening to change, not just this is a communications and content, like a marketing piece team. The conversation there was like, how do we stay on top of it so we can be aware of what's going on? As we were in the meeting, there were 2 or 3 other press releases which changed the nature of the conversation. And that's so going back to AI being hard, like, everything's changing. Everything's changing. People don't understand it at scale. Components are new. So the key thing is to understand, as we were talking about earlier, where the value sits. These systems are only going to get smarter in terms of IQ. What we need to do is focus on how we can make them smarter in terms of expertise. And that is the context layer that supports decisioning with these types of solutions.
Additional questions? As you can tell, I'm happy to talk.
Thank you both. Andrew Fisher. And John, you'd mentioned something a couple times that I don't know if it gets enough attention, because when we talk about data, when we talk about multimodal, we think text, we think images, audio, video. But to your point, and I think what ultimately gets us to the level 4 automation and adoption is the procedural data. And so I'm curious, as you're having conversations with your clients, are there any sort of tools, processes, or guidance that you are sort of helping them with in terms of identifying, collecting, aggregating that procedural data? And I'm sure a part of it is also sort of reflecting, is this the process that we should be reflecting with the new sort of way of doing things, or can we rethink it, reimagine it, given the new tools that we have at our disposal?
Fascinating question. The answer is yes and no. We have some clients, it depends what level people are approaching the problem at. We have people approaching the problem at the very highest level and saying, how do we redesign this function, this domain within a business? That comes usually as a C at the beginning of the title, and there's a real need to be able to do that. As we get further down inside of an organization and we talk about a specific team and a specific thing that they're looking to be able to do, at that point, it becomes less about the end-to-end process and more about, how do I do my job, right? My responsibility is to bring those conversations up so that we can start thinking about process and process re-engineering. AI is transformation, and transformation is process re-engineering. So it has to be a way to think about the world. The most important part of your question, I think, is that it's about reimagining how things are happening, not about taking what's happened and recreating it inside of an AI solution. That piece is more of an expertise on the client side. Like if people understand that, we can have great conversations about changing the world. If it's more of a case of like, I need to do some IT stuff and we're going to need to change this using an AI is going to be the tool for it. It's a different set of conversations which don't get to the same level.
Can I just add one thing before we out of time? We have 10 seconds, but I mean, it's a fantastic lens through which to look at your business. I'm going to think about how I phrase this because it was a conversation, but I don't want to. It would be very interesting as you go back to your organizations and you think about the current value that you're seeing from AI, particularly task-oriented AI, where you've got agents executing tasks. How much of that is related to the effective adoption of digital labor versus how much is related to really just having to scrutinize the process that was in place in the first place? And how much over the course of 1 or 2 decades has a process kind of got very, very wobbly. And now this digital transformation is a driver of real scrutiny. So for those who don't, like, I'm a biomedical scientist by training. I worked in epidemiology for quite some time. Don't ask me why I'm in the consumer industry now. But there's a very, very interesting effect. When you start to concentrate on a disease because you want to prevent it, incidents spike. And that has nothing to do with the disease itself. It has to do with the fact that you're looking at it. And it'll just be very interesting over the course of the next few years, as you go back, just think how much of this was just tightening up a process versus the actual digital adoption. But what is that promise in 2 to 3 years' time as a time horizon as we really start to adopt digital labor and we effectively use it to execute tasks? Where is that reallocated human capital going to go and really drive changes to the way that we think strategically and the way that we compete in the marketplace? Just be an interesting thought experiment for you to take on. Maybe I'll speak to you next year. We'll see how you went.